I regret this a footnote that I missed Secretary Malinowski. I'd like to get an answer from him about the TIP report, and I'd also would have asked him how 2,822 arbitrary politically motivated arrests in Cuba during the first 7 months of this year alone is an indicator that we're going to be headed in the right direction. Pretty amazing to me. It's pretty amazing to me that when our colleagues in the Senate go to visit in Cuba, they don't visit with human rights activists, political dissidents, independent journalists, because if they do, they get barred from a government meeting. We've got to break that idea, because if globally the message we send is that in order to meet the government officials of a country, that we can't meet with human rights activists, political dissidents, independent journalists in China, in Malaysia, and any other place in the world, that would be a sad state of affairs for the United States. Mr. Chairman, let me start off by thanking Human Rights Watch, particularly your colleagues who do the hard work every day on behalf of trafficking victims around the world, for contributing your experience and expertise to our efforts. And before I proceed with some questions, I'd like to enter a couple of documents for the record, and I'm sure the Chairman wouldn't mind. The first is a letter I sent yesterday to Secretary of State Kerry along with 18 of my colleagues, and I understand a similar letter in the House has nearly 130 signatures expressing our concern about reports of a possible unwarranted upgrade of Malaysia in this year's long-delayed trafficking in persons report. And the other document I'd like to submit in the record is a piece from yesterday's Hill by David Abramovitz, the Vice President of Humanity United, on the same topic. And without objection is so ordered. Mr. Ambassador, I'm glad you're here today. Your experience as our lead diplomat on this issue can help us get some perspective on what's going on right now. The 2015 TIP report, which we have still not seen, will have the latest release date ever. So let me ask you, what's the normal reporting period covered by a TIP report?
The TIP report covers from March to March and comes out typically in June. When this committee confirmed me as the TIP ambassador, I had to get on with the job 10 days later, because that's when it was supposed to come out, by mid-June. It is unfortunate to leave an important job vacant, similar to what occurred with the Ambassador for International Religious Freedom for a while. I'm very glad to finally see a nomination seems to be moving forward. But in any case, the report, it really works. It propels governments to try and change their laws.
Yeah, well, I certainly appreciate your service in your previous iteration, and now I'm sure with your present leadership, it will continue to be important. Now, I understand that it's not unprecedented for some late-breaking information after the closure of a reporting period that we just described has been included, but to your knowledge, have events or actions taken in June or July of a year ever affected a country's ranking?
No.
Was it your personal experience when it comes to external pressure? Did you have external pressure to get to the right answer on a country's ranking because of other diplomatic or security concerns?
There is always a pulling and hauling at the State Department, typically between the TIP office and the regional bureaus, where regional bureaus are raising other equities, security interests, counterterrorism issues, energy access, commercial concerns. In general, the department has come out in the right place, refereeing between those interests. I saw it during my tenure, but I really commend you, and before you walked in the room, I commended you and Senator Cardin for raising, in the context of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, countries like Malaysia, and for that matter, Thailand, who would be affected under the TPP. They should not be shielded from the basic minimum standards set out in the Trafficking Victims Protection Act.
Well, as you know, my amendment prohibits fast track for Tier 3 human trafficking countries signed into law by President Obama as part of the Trade Promotion Authority. In your view, is that type of action helpful in combating human trafficking?
Well, I think that you need to protect the integrity of the TIP report. It is clear that Tier 3 rankings, whether they involve sanctions or just the stigma of a Tier 3 ranking, work. And particularly where the United States has a relationship on other grounds, on strategic and economic grounds. Countries have responded to that. Allies of the United States, like Israel and Turkey in earlier eras, before I even came into the trafficking position, Cambodia facing the threat of Tier 3 or staying on Tier 3.
So if the possibility of being on Tier 3 of the TIP report was an incentivizing factor to change your actions, move into action, pass the appropriate laws and whatnot, wouldn't it even be a greater incentivizer that if in addition to being on Tier 3 on the TIP report, you can't get preferential access to U.S. markets?
Well, I think that, you know, it cuts against the idea of using the leverage.
Oh.
I think it's unfortunate that Tier 3 countries don't get the economic sanctions that are intended for them, and that's waived oftentimes, but it's really important to put that more stigma on.
Now, I'd ask you and Ms. Morgano, I don't want you to feel I've left out here, after complimenting your organization's great work. If, in fact, and I hope this is not the case, because I've seen nothing for Malaysia to move from Tier 3 to Tier 2. But if, in fact, that was the case, what would you say about such an action?
Thank you, Senator Menendez, and thank you for your leadership on this. We've really enjoyed working with you. We also hope it's certainly not the case. We understand a final decision may not have yet been made. We remain hopeful, but if in fact a decision has been made, we would say that it seems very likely that it would be political interference to move it up.
And would it not have, my final question, and I'll turn to Senator Kaine, would it not have the consequence beyond Malaysia that it would be political interference? Would it not have the consequence of undermining the veracity of the TIP report in a way that other countries would say, well, if I'm important enough to the United States for trade or for some other reason, then I don't have to really live up to worrying about if I am on Tier 3 or not?
I think it certainly undermines the TIP report. It sends a poor message to other countries who may be sanctioned or on the Tier 3 list. It also undermines the goals, the presidentially stated goals of the TPP in terms of moving those countries in Asia into a better place. And that is part of the longer-term vision that we would like to see by having Malaysia make the required changes before it's moved up.
Just add one thing. You know, the United States has been very comfortable putting allies, security allies like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, a country that we marshaled our military forces to liberate, on Tier 3, to call it like it is. I'd like to see us even go farther on the broader human rights front and press those nations to reform. It's in their interests and in our security interests as well.
I agree with you. And the last point I'll make is that beyond the TIP issue, if you start political maneuvering for the purposes of accomplishing a goal, then in addition to the human rights and trafficking question, you'd have to worry about labor rights and environmental issues that we are all concerned about in trade agreements, and saying, will you manipulate those in order to meet the standards?